Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and so far, it's been a really fun time diving headfirst into the world of Sentai. After 2 years and countless comments telling me to do just that, I've liked most of what I've seen, so finally getting the chance to follow a show while it's airing has been exciting. So I figured, why not discuss how Ryusoulger's been shaping up? Let's dive right in. In an effort to save Sentai from its apparent financial turmoil, we have yet another season featuring dinosaurs as the motif/selling point. Let's hope the strategy pays off in more ways than one, because regardless of how real these cancellation rumors are, it'd be a real shame to even have that be a possibility for a show that Power Rangers obviously depends on. If the worst ever does come, we'd still have a long time before any of that directly affects Rangers, but even still, if Hasbro ever plans to up the ante one day and start producing 100% American seasons, I'd rather that not be because they had to. Speaking on the show itself, Ryusoulger presents this visually interesting blend of medieval knights, dinos, and the more expressive color palettes we usually associate with Toku. One thing to point out immediately is that almost everything about this season, both by way of initial impressions and having seen the first 7 episodes, looks incredible, including but not limited to most of the costume designs, the weapons, and the very agile mech. And the way the score and instrumentals blend into the backdrop of most scenes do well to lift up the show's grander moments. On several fronts, Ryusoulger has proven to be a very technically proficient production. That's not an aspect I usually end up spending much time talking about for most shows we discuss, but for this particular Sentai, it really just stood out to me as perhaps the most consistently good part of the experience so far. Unfortunately, the more critical aspects of the show have proven to be a bit dicier, those being the characters, the actual plot, and how both serve the overall tone of the show. So the story goes that Ko, Melto, and Asuna, all Dino Knights in training, lose their masters in the very first episode. That's sad, I guess, but we really had next to no in-depth knowledge of how any of these mentor-student relationships actually work, or, more crucially, why we should be invested in them. And, on top of that, they divvy up the Master is Lost moment into 3, which effectively burns away even more of the emotional punch scenes like this should have. But that's not really all that bad, because now the show has a great opportunity to use this loss to carry the characters. The obvious but still best path, in my opinion, would be to slowly unravel said relationships, follow along with the characters while they work through what suddenly losing a master means to them, especially since the quick hit nature of it all would naturally leave them wondering if they truly are ready for the conflict at hand. If you're already caught up with the show, then sadly, you know what comes next. Only a single episode after the fact has done anything to capitalize on the intriguing premise set into motion by episode 1. The tonal shifts from episode to episode, and even from moment to moment at times, are so jarring, you'd be forgiven for thinking 2 different production companies are currently playing a very expensive game of hot potato, with one completely foregoing what the other had in mind with respect to direction and pacing. This isn't universally the case, however. I do think how they handled methodically acquiring all of their mechs so far has been pretty well done. I also tend to prefer it when Zords or mechs can have a bit of a personality to them as well, so on that front, Tiramigo is up there as far as best characters go. But, for the most part, the story feels so at odds with itself at times that it's hard to get a true feel for what they want this season to be. Case in point, Episode 2 could have been about how all 3 are coping with the abruptness of their situation, but the fact that their former masters are very gone never hits home in favor of a fencer dude who leaves his family? But okay, fine, that's still kind of a softball, because now they can just bounce off his familial negligence as a way to say, you still have a family to go back to. We lost part of ours. That would hit hard, because this is also the team's first experience with the extreme feelings that empower their enemies in the first place. But instead, Episode 2 functions as if the only thing to happen in Episode 1 is the team got their powers. So that's kind of a tonal nightmare. But then, the rushed pacing debuts in Episode 3, alongside Bamba and Soa. And now we have a cacophony of disconnects, because the fact that Asian Terminator wants to simply kill the people making Minosaurs would, in theory, be a good enough way to connect saving lives now with knowing the pain of life lost then. But again, that's never delved into, because for 2 of the original 3 knights, their masters might as well never have existed. So the idea of not preemptively killing people rings hollow, because it's presented as just the thing that heroes do, instead of having this very visceral, very palpable connection to the people we're following. And then, Toa, our resident green, who is initially fine with his brother's methods, adjusts his position on a dime because he met some random girl. I mean, fine, I guess, but to me, Sane feels pretty tacked on as more of a blunt idea and less of a character. Her involvement becomes even more flimsy when you realize that Yui could have easily filled a similar role. Maybe Toa is the one noteworthy character who unironically loves the videos she makes, so now, instead of random girl's life being on the line, it's Yui's, except much, much later. Like, seriously, keep some bullets in the chamber here. Which is a great segue to the vlogger herself. I actually kind of like Yui, as directly opposed to seemingly everyone else on the planet. But her getting infected with Minosaur-based depression came at a point where everyone was still getting a handle on the main characters, let alone a supporting one. And then it ends up forming a bit of a connection between her and Asuna for some reason, a quickly forgotten about and heavily underdeveloped connection, I'll add. It wouldn't even be a point of contention for me if it didn't feel like every other scene in this show disagreed with the previous one. So on top of breezing through the death of the Dino Knight Masters, we're almost certainly going to breeze through the fact that Yui wanting to offer herself to save people she hasn't known for very long speaks to a pretty serious mental health concern, because we know that such a decision is by no means the standard operating procedure for the people that unwittingly give birth to these creatures. More recently, however, Ryusoulger is seeming to dig into something a bit more serialized, so we'll soon see if that plotline goes anywhere. But for as fun as this show is to watch week to week, it does have some fairly gaping issues with how it's progressing its plot to this point, including the notion of introducing 2 other rangers while Melto and Asuna have yet to acquire a focus episode, a notion that has never sat well with me, even when Ninja Storm did it. It all just feels like Ryusoulger, for all of its positives, is still trying to find the tone it wants to run with, except while it's happening. Not the greatest of indicators for things to come, and it might be a little bit too late to salvage some of the since forgotten elements of intrigue it premiered with. However, all that having been said, once the series settles in a bit more, as it very well might be doing, I do think there's a good chance it can improve. And when it does, maybe we'll talk about how they were able to course correct in a future video. But until then, thanks for watching.